Derek.
Hey, Jason.
Good conversation. Hey,
Yeah,
man.
Randall Worley is on the podcast today, and
third time
he gets the terry cloth robe with the taco logo emblazoned on it.
It's so funny.
But we both have had such rich conversations and histories with Randall.
Yeah.
He's really been a father and a mentor and a trailblazer in the things that we're now kind of coming into, and our audience is really talking about, and that matters to them.
Yeah.
So he said, one of his quotes was just that empathy is the echo of someone else's pain. So to be empathetic is to echo their pain back to them and know that you're hearing it and that they are seen.
That's it. Yeah, and that's something we've experienced. Both of us start off this conversation by him sharing a little bit about these gatherings that he's been doing, him and Penny have been doing, his wife, and how we have participated and benefited from spending a weekend away with him and some other leaders, and how we have been seen. He is a voice that we trust. He's a father voice, and he's a trusted voice.
I mean, we got into so many different topics, and then the after conversation. Once again, why aren't we recording, man?
We talked for another hour.
The reason we say that is to keep y'all baited to stay around for more stuff later on.
That's right.
No, we're not that good. Randall is writing a new book. He's going to be launching some content online and become more of an online presence. And so, we talk about his new book, and man, the concepts that he's dealing with are right now hot, ready for today.
Yeah, and very much connected to the first part of the conversation around what God's doing in the church today, what he's doing in community. In fact, this is a conversation that's really, I thought, timely for the talk communities that we're looking at doing, because we really we're talking about what's the quote? Methodology?
Yeah, he said that sometimes when there's a theological shift and you see God in a new light, in our case that's been a better light that looks more like Jesus, it may also include and necessitate a methodology shift that, hey, maybe we don't need to just gather and have a concert and a TED talk and then pray a prayer and see you next week.
Yeah,
it can be that's fine, but it also needs a methodology shift, kind of more of a face-to-face, more of an intimate connection, more of an interaction of dialogue as opposed to a monologue. So it's challenging some things that I've been thinking for a very long time as a pastor. I mean, this is my livelihood, and yet I think we have to go deeper. And I love the both and type thinking that Randall flows in so well, because we're the same way. We're cut from the same cloth.
Yeah, he is a man dogmatic in love, as we've talked about. And so it is both. And this was a rich conversation. And I think it's really going to encourage and bless folks. I want to, while we're talking, we're far enough, or we're close enough to the date now, that let's just talk about August 29th. Talk Communities.
Talk Communities kicks off 2:00 Eastern, August 29th. Go to afamilystory.org if you're not on the mailing list, and that will ensure that you get. We'll also put it out on social media and all that, but that'll ensure that you get a hold of the Zoom link. We are inviting you, all of our listeners, to a gathering online to talk, and we're calling it Talk Communities.
I think it's going to stick. It's good.
Yeah,
we're looking forward to it. Yeah,
we really are. We really are.
Yeah,
it's going to be the first of many other things, but maybe it's a little experimental at first, but we'll work through all the kinks, and ultimately we want to develop community with you guys, face to face, and interaction and question and response. We do not claim to have all the answers, but man, we will definitely listen and talk through our favorite subject of revealing Jesus and him revealing the Father perfectly.
Yeah, amen. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah.
In the meantime, this is a really good conversation with our good friend, Randall Worley.
Enjoy.
It's all good.
So, hey, Randall Worley in the house. Thank you so much, Randall, for joining us today. You've been a couple times. I can hear your happy dog in the background, the dog that sits in your lap normally when you're in your big easy chair. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. And I trust we're going to dive into some things that are really, really helpful for our audience. And we really appreciate you, and thank you for investing in us. You know, Jason and I have both been on one of your retreats, and we want to talk a little bit about that. Where'd you get the idea for that initially?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you guys for having me back. I really do, with all sincerity, consider a privilege to be on the podcast with you, especially since I'm aware of the lineup that you've had of late. These are people that I consider to be thought leaders, especially in our world.
Right.
And to be able to be in some small way a part of that lineup is a real privilege to me. It really is.
I love you, man.
Yeah, we love you so much, and you've invested so much in our lives. Man, you know, you said something there. I want to just hit it if you don't mind. But in our world, how would you define our world?
Well, that probably, well, not probably, it really will be addressed in something that we're going to talk about later on in the podcast regarding something I'm working on now. It's a writing project. And if you'll just allow me, I'll defer that.
Yeah, I'll encourage our listeners to hang with us, because we're going to define what our world is.
Yeah. I'm glad you picked up on that.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the retreats that we've been doing and what was the impetus for that. You guys know that I've been in ministry this year 45 years. And for almost 30 of those years, I was a senior leader, a pastor in a church. I left that role a little over 15 years ago to be involved in full-time itinerant ministry. And it's been really rewarding because I've had the opportunity to travel literally around the world. Sometimes when I think about the many places that I've been and the venues that I've had the privilege of speaking in, it seems surreal. It really does, that I've had that wonderful privilege to do that. But it was in 2019, toward the end of 2019, my son, I have three sons, and I don't like to refer to him in this way, but it is chronological. He is our middle son, who just turned 40 this past week. Man, I'm getting old. But anyway, he, as you guys know, he assists me, especially in what we do with these retreats for leaders. We want to minister to ministry. And in 2019, he was having a conversation with me, and I knew that he was a little bit frustrated with me because he handles all the social media stuff that we do, and does a great job of that, as well as the retreats. And he was a little bit frustrated with me, and I think maybe he felt like that I had shifted into neutral and I was not reaching my fullest potential. And he said, "Dad, I want to know what you're really passionate about, because I feel like some of the things that I'm urging you to do that you don't really have any passion for." And without any hesitation, I told him, I said, "Lee," I don't know whether I mentioned that's his name. I said, "Lee, the thing that I'm the most passionate about is not standing on a platform in front of hundreds, sometimes thousands of people speaking. But the thing that is the most fulfilling to me is the time that I have with leaders, with pastors. He knows that I do this on a weekly basis. I'm fielding calls from guys from all over the country. And I said, but when I travel, it's the one-on-one time that I have with them face to face, where they know that they're seen, they know that they're heard, they know that I am someone that can empathize with them because I've been in that experience, whatever they're dealing with, self-doubt, conflict in relationships, power struggles, all those kinds of things that make up church life, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And he said, well, that's where we need to shift our focus. And so, of course, that was in November of 2019. And of course, then COVID hit and it shut us down. But we had the vision for it, wrote the mission statement, and were able to get started. I guess it was in 22, and we've had 4 since then. And what we do is we invite a group of people that we have already established a relationship with. Usually it's 5 couples. You guys have had the experience, and I hope that it was everything that you expected. We rent a luxury 5-bedroom, 5-bath condominium right on the beach here in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And for 3 days, we just spend time with these couples. It's really not, the emphasis has nothing to do with me teaching on any particular topic. If you remember, it's very relaxed and laid back. We have been amazed at the chemistry that has occurred almost immediately, because usually people in ministry are usually the most suspicious and paranoid people on the planet.
Right.
And understandably so.
For good reason, right?
Yeah, understandably so. I'm not saying that, as a criticism. But the chemistry happens almost within the first hour. People that come in very guarded, very quickly realize that they are truly in a safe space. Yeah. And you remember what we do is we usually open up each session with a question. And and we just all I do is try to moderate that. And we give them a lot of free time. There's a lot of time for relaxation and for conversation. And we have had, the response that we've been having is far more than what we expected. We sent out a survey asking people, what was the first thing you noticed? How can we improve? What were the things that, really were moving to you? And, we're hearing back from people. They're saying, well, for the first time in 25 years, I feel like that I'm really seen and heard. Yeah. And when you look at some of the statistics, like I said, I've been in ministry for 45 years. And now that I've committed myself to ministry, I have not been surprised, but my heart has been grieved about some of the things that are happening out there that probably most people are unaware of. 40% of pastors right now are thinking about quitting the ministry. 35% of them battle with depression and fear of inadequacy. And I think it's about 26% of pastors, they live in chronic fatigue. 35% of them battle depression. Yeah, I mean, these statistics, I know they're not statistics, but they're really alarming and concerning to me. And, my definition of empathy is it is the echo of someone else's pain.
That's good.
I understand that I pastored all those years for this particular purpose now.
Wow.
I went through what I went through so that I could be someone that could empathize with them. And it's been a great joy of mine that I have the grace to do it. And you guys, well, at least Derek has even been here in my home. We're right now coordinating our schedule to bring couples just here to our home.
Yeah.
Not just in that group setting.
That's good.
That's what that's all about.
Randall. First of all, this is your third time, as Derek said on the podcast. We have a jacket on its way to you, Three Timers Club.
It's a terry cloth robe with a emblazoned taco logo on the corner.
Okay. Okay.
I actually lied. I just made that up, but now I think we should do it.
We should totally do that.
Jason and I have both had the experience and honor of being included in that group of 5 couples. I don't know if I was the first one there, but I got to meet all your Virginia friends that are now my lifelong friends.
Yeah,
and
that was the first one.
I have to testify that Randall provides this at no cost to us. Just get down there. Everything's included once you're there. It's a beautiful, beautiful condo that sleeps 5 in individual bedrooms. There's a kitchen in the center. It's like this perfect space. And I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt that marked me as being more confident than ever that God sees me because Randall and Penny Worley saw me. And
that's right.
Man, I remember one night I just lost it. Maybe it was the bourbon, but I lost it and broke down. And I just felt like grief and fear and anxiety was just flooding out of me and leaving me in that moment. And I was changed. And of course, that began a great relationship, deeper relationship between you and me, Randall. You've been to the church to speak, and we were kind of feeling each other out there. And I got to say that, these events that you're doing are life changing. And it's almost like there's a new set of goals and a new focus in your life that I think is more impactful than, or like you said, all that you've done has led up to being able to be impactful and make a difference in the kingdom for this moment. And then, of course, once Jason heard about it, or you were asking me about other people that might want to come, I mentioned Jason and his wife Karen, and it was a treasured time.
Yeah,
and I wish every pastor could have that experience.
And I'll share a little bit because it was the same. Randall, we've shared with you a little bit one-on-one and during that time, but I did come in a little bit. My cards close to the vest. I trusted you, and yet I, having been in ministry and a pastor, my wife, of course, her least favorite thing to do is to hang out with a bunch of strangers. But here we come, and from the moment we walk in the door, I'll mention it too. We're handed a drink, and we're loved, and that time, we felt so seen, and I could say the same thing from Derek. You have a father grace on you. You and Penny both father and mother, and grace on you. And I want to note these two things, and then maybe kind of ask you a question. I just came back from a conference, or from a church that I went to speak at. I appreciate that I got to speak on a Sunday morning. I'm rethinking the model because my favorite times of these trips are the Friday nights when we get to sit together.
Right.
And I'm there. I get to talk a little bit because they brought me in, but then I get to do what you did. And I think you speak to this with a great authority. I get to ask questions. And those questions actually create a greater depth of connection and opportunity and intimacy. And I'm grateful for the Sunday morning, but you can only do this much on a Sunday morning.
Right.
And those moments in a living room with about 20 people is where I've seen the most breakthrough, the kind of thing that Derek's talking about, where, when we were with you, even you guys participated. I connected with Lee, and he shared. There was tears, there was connection, there was a sense of being seen, all of us. And so I would love to have you speak a little bit about why that's so valuable to you at this point.
Yeah, I understand that the church complex industry, whatever, that I've been a part of for so many years, for 45 years now, is probably never going to be something that will become completely obsolete. The conventional expression of the church, the Sunday morning gathering, where people come with expectations that the pastor, teacher, communicator is going to speak into their lives very clearly, and they are able to leave with direction. I know that has value, but what I'm finding in conversations, not only with the constituents, but the leaders as well, is that what you just described that we experience in a very unstructured environment. It's extemporaneous. It's organic. There's something that happens there that has far more an indelible effect on people than listening to a monologue.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean that. I don't mean that to sound like I'm, referring to the preaching or teaching delivery system as in a very derogatory way. But I don't really believe that, even though this sounds like self-sabotage, I'll be doing it this weekend at a church.
Yeah.
I'll be standing in front of an audience and I'll be doing a monologue or a TED talk or whatever, you want to call it. And again, it has value to it.
Yeah,
but
it does.
It by far does not have the impact on people that more organic, relational, conversational type of setting has.
Yeah.
And it's just what we've become used to. Think about it. How many questions does the average person have on a Sunday morning in a 30 to 45 minute message that goes unresolved?
Right.
And there's not really a format for it. And so much of our church culture, unfortunately, is very personality centered and performance driven.
Yeah.
And program driven.
It is. Derek and I were talking with Catherine Toon, who we've had on recently. Amazing. And I was telling her afterwards, we have these great conversations after we hit stop that seems to keep going. And I was telling her about a prophetic word that I'd gotten 5 years ago that I'm just now seeing come to fruition in my life, but not just in my life, in the broader church. And I had some friends that prayed over me. Justin and Jessica Collins had prayed over me, pastors in New York. Love those guys. Had seen an archipelago, a bunch of islands. And when they were sharing with me, we just shared with them our loneliness as leaders, and particularly the journey we were on in that moment. And they said, "We see you as an island." So when they said it to me, I thought, yeah, duh. we feel like an island. That's not helpful, man. It's supposed to be an encouraging. But he went on to say, I see an archipelago. I see you as a part of a series of islands, and I see God beginning to bridge these islands, and I see the resources that they have been developing on all the islands becoming available. And then as I shared that with Catherine, she said, she talked about the network of the islands being connected under the water. They've always been connected. Mm-hmm. And I'm beginning to see through this podcast the connections with people like you, ministries, folks that have been doing this all around the world, awakening to this gospel of union and this as though God's awakening us to the original narrative, maybe is a better way to say it. Mm-hmm. And I really value you as a father who's been connected to the church. Share a little bit of what you see. And I know I'm going a little off script here, but I think it'll lead us into some of what you're writing. Share a little bit of what you see in the church today. I feel like, Randall, when we launched this podcast, it was just my best yes in the moment. And it was what's happened is we've connected with the people that are having on, and then a whole lot of other people. This week, I'm going to have lunch with folks coming into town that listen to the podcast. Last week, we did that. We had lunch with a couple that came into town who's been listening to the podcast. There's an awakening taking place that they're okay with the monologue. They're okay with something, but they're also looking for this expression of union, this connection, heart to heart connection across the table. Mm-hmm. What do you see taking place in the church? What do you see without us leaving the monologue? Like you said, I think that's always going to be that structure is always going to be in place.
I think it's going to be both and, and look, I'm saying this as a pastor who I do the concert and the TED Talk every Sunday. And of course we have prayer and we have connection with people, but it's just not the type of thing that happens that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. And I'm beginning to shift my understanding in part because of what I experienced with Randall and Penny Worley in Myrtle Beach. Right. It's like, this dynamic is more ecclesia than what I'm doing every Sunday. And how do we navigate that or include that so that we can have a both and? We live in Charlotte, North Carolina. No one's going to stop doing church on Sunday at 10 a.m. except that we actually just got kicked out of our building. So we're moving to a Saturday night. So I guess somebody is, but do you hear what I'm saying? I think it's this hunger and this yearning for something original, something, for lack of a better word, that it doesn't reform anything. It actually reconciles what was originally done and the way that Jesus did it. So I don't know, I'm rambling now. But I want to hear your thoughts, Randall, because I think it's a seismic shift in the body of Christ.
I'm feeling that.
Yeah, I do too. And I am in total agreement with you that it's not an either or, it's a both and. Right. And I hope that, and I'm not hedging here, I hope that anyone who's listening does not interpret what I said earlier as, the more personality-centered, program-driven, performance-oriented culture of Christianity is something that's irrelevant. It's no longer relevant. That's not what I'm saying at all. Right. And I'm not saying that just because, as I said, that could sound very self-sabotaging to someone that does what I do. And I think, and this conversation could really evolve into probably more time than we have allocated here. But I think with especially what is going on right now that you guys are very much aware of, and I'm sure that the vast majority of your listeners are very much aware of this lightning rod issue, if I can call it, of deconstruction. Mm-hmm. And of course, that not only, as I see it, causes us to reevaluate a lot of the things that we thought were non-negotiable in terms of our theology or our belief system, our doctrine, whatever. But it also causes us to revisit and reevaluate our methodology as well.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I'll say this and hopefully resist the temptation to unpack it any further. But I hope you see the connection between the two. I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
I think that they're totally related. Because when people begin to question so many different things, under the broader umbrella of deconstruction, whether it be the inerrancy of Scripture or some of the topics that you guys have dealt with as it relates to penal substitution, topics like theodicy, what is the true nature of God?
Yeah.
Is he an angry, deity, all those kinds of things. So when they begin to question those things, I think it also naturally leads them into thinking about, okay, if we've been possibly wrong about some of those things, or maybe what we've known, as you've heard me say before, is not entirely inaccurate, but we're discovering certainly incomplete. Then what about our methodology? Not just our theology, but our methodology.
Yeah, that's good, Randall.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So, of course, if we're going, I used to say myself, and I had a lot of colleagues that, with all sincerity, they were making every effort to make sure that their church, their congregation, was a New Testament church.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We want to be a New Testament church in every sense of the word. And I knew that they were very sincere, as I was. But, the model that we are accustomed to and that people are, feel comfortable with, of somebody standing up on a Sunday morning and taking a text and doing exegesis or doing something that is an inspirational exhortation, you really can't find that in the New Testament church.
Right.
Correct.
Even the word teach comes from the word dialogue or didactic. It has to do with engaging people, not just in listening to you, but it has to, and of course, Jesus, who was not just a teacher, he was the teacher. That was the method that he used. He engaged people in conversation.
I love it.
And I know that there are a lot of people that say, well, I know that may be true, but that is not practical for our culture. Well, that may be the case, but I think that we have to provide opportunities for people. And some would say, well, we do that with our small groups or whatever they call them. They're used to be, back in the day with me, they were cell groups when we first introduced that concept.
Right.
That's the reason why I said, that could evolve into far more than what we want to cover today. I don't think I'm in agreement with you, Derek. I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and.
Yeah.
But I do think that there are people, their taste is quite eclectic. And there are people like you are discovering that have contacted you via the podcast, and they want more conversation. So they're coming to see you. And they may not ever gravitate back toward that more conventional expression of the church. They may want something that is different,
Yeah.
Hey guys, we have heard the cry of our audience, and you guys are looking for deeper connection than just listening to us talk and interview people.
Right.
You want to get to know one another. And so we're going to host a Zoom call, aren't we, Jason?
We are. And we have a date and time, August 29th, 2 p.m. Eastern. We're going to have a call with some folks who listen to this podcast. What are we calling this? Taco
This is our Taco Communities Zoom call. But we want you to join us in some conversation around rethinking God, but also to kind of develop a tighter community. So August 29th, 2 p.m. Eastern.
That's right.
You need to go to familystory.org to sign up for the mailing list, to make sure that you get the Zoom link that we will send out a couple days prior. But we're inviting you to hang out with us online for a while. We'll have question and answer. We'll get to know one another better. We want to hear from you directly. So what else, Jason?
Well, we've heard a whole lot of requests about, hey, do you know someone in my area that thinks like this? And a whole lot of folks that are maybe feeling like they're on the journey alone. And so that's what got us here. How do we connect with you guys, and how do we help you connect with one another? So August 29th, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, familystory.org. Sign up on our mailing list, and we'll have a good time together. Feel free to bring tacos.
If you want, feel free to join us with taco in hand, but please mute your mic if that's the case. But hey, it started off as a joke, Taco Communities, but it's gaining momentum, and we want you to be a part of our Taco community.
All right. See you guys August 29th.
Looking forward to it.
Guys, my book is out, Leaving and Finding Jesus. If you've already read it, I would be so grateful if you would go to Amazon and write a review. this actually helps the rankings. It also helps people trust the book before they buy it. Thankful for you for that. And also so thankful for all the support that's come in over the last little bit. We're just blown away, blessed by folks' generosity. You know, A Family Story is a nonprofit. This is a listener-supported podcast. And we're just so grateful to be on the journey with you. Guys, I'm so thankful for you. Praying life and joy and wonder over you today. All right, let's get back to the podcast. Yeah.
And we need to be okay with it. To me,
I agree.
The methodology, I think that's a brilliant statement, that not only often is there a theological shift, but it may also include a methodology shift as well. That. And I can feel my old, early, just planted the church 20 Derricks ago, Pastor Derrick. And I was like, it's going to be the perfect first century church. We're going to do Acts 2:42, apostles' doctrine, fellowship, breaking of bread, prayer. And, I kind of forgot to include the presence of Jesus.
And
but,
sincere.
But it was sincere.
I've got a book somewhere behind me here that I found about, probably 30 years ago. And it rocked my world because I was that senior pastor with staff members and programs, doing what everybody else was doing, going and blowing, as they say, trying to get my share of the market. I'm just being honest. It wasn't so much that I was interested in the salvation of men as much as I was getting my fair share of the market.
You're running and gunning.
Yeah, just out of my own insecurity. I found my identity in that kind of thing. But I've got a book here behind me that I stumbled on. It was written in the 40s, I believe it was, by Ernest Loosely. And it's just a little thin book. It's probably not even 100 pages, and it's called When the Church Was Young.
Wow.
And when I started reading it, like Derek said, the 20 Randalls ago, was deeply convicted. I couldn't unsee what I'd seen. But he just started out by saying, when the church was young, it had no Bible.
Right.
When the church was young, it had no buildings.
Right.
When the church was young, even though we looked through a lens of our own making back at the writings of the Apostle Paul about church structure and that kind of thing, and we come to a lot of conclusions that, in my opinion, that are totally inaccurate. So he says when the church was young, they had very little definable leadership.
Mm-hmm.
No buildings, no Bible, no definable leadership. Right. A number of different things that he addresses. And when I set the book down, I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? Because I'm this. He is right. There's such a disparity between what he is saying and the simplicity of what the New Testament church was and what we are now. How am I going to find balance between that? Yeah. But I think, here's something, interrupt me anytime. This is your podcast.
This good.
This is something I was thinking about earlier today. Brian McLaren, in his book, The Great Spiritual Migration, addresses so eloquently a number of these things that are happening, the various shifts that are taking place, not only in culture, but also influencing the church. Excuse me. He doesn't mention this in The Great Spiritual Migration, even though that was a very impactful book on my understanding of ecclesiology and its history.
Me too.
And the trajectory that it's on right now. But he later on talked about, in one of his most recent books, that in the stages of faith, and there are other men, of course, that have written extensively on stages of faith. And, to some people that may mean something totally different than what he is talking about. But very succinctly, he says that the stages of faith move from simplicity to complexity, and from complexity to perplexity, and then eventually to harmony.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, there's a lot that falls under all of that, but I think he's right.
Yeah,
I do too.
We start out with simplicity, and invariably it moves us into uh,
complexity.
complexity
Yeah.
that results in perplexity and eventually harmony.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
Richard Rohr echoed that in his process of what we are calling deconstruction as gained notoriety as the name deconstruction. But I like Richard Rohr's, orientation, disorientation, reorientation. It's
Right.
and so McLaren and Rohr are, I mean, they're basically saying the same things, putting a couple different labels on it. But a lot of these voices, I mean, we're just groundbreaking voices. And Randall, I see you as one of those pioneer, groundbreaking voices that was exploring and putting yourself out there with some new thoughts that aren't actually new thoughts. They're actually really old thoughts. And it seems like there's a restoration of these things. And people they're just not hungry for church attendance. I can tell you that as a pastor. And so, and you know what? I'm fine with it because I'm asking myself the question, well, then there may not be a lot of value for them that's happening here if they're only showing up once every 8 weeks or 6 weeks. And so I need to redefine what will bring value. And I'm finding the number one thing that is bringing value is if you can get in an environment where Jesus is revealed through the testimony and experience of multiple people,
Yeah.
discipleship is automatic from there. It's exponential, and that can only happen in a smaller environment. We've explored a couple different things by breaking out tables, round tables. People walk in and we're sitting around a round table and we have a worship time, we have prayer time, and then no message. We're going to sit around the table and we're going to wrestle with something in scripture. We're going to talk about your experience with Jesus in this area or that area. And my introverts hate it. They're like, I hope you never do that again. but eventually they dive into it. And so I once again, I don't know that there is any perfect structure, maybe more a willingness of our current church leadership to back off and say, I don't have to be, the main thing. I don't have to be certain about everything. And I can enter into the question with you because I'm a follower of Jesus too.
Yeah. And I think that this is where I'm thankful for you, Randall, because I think you would, the way you might say what Rohr and the McLaren have said is questioning my answers. I know you've written on you making room for there to be an and relearning, for there to be a humility. This is the part that's important to me, that the awakening I see happening, because in those small groups, there does need to be leadership. There needs to be someone that's making that place safe for you. So they're convinced that Jesus is perfect theology, that he's good. Okay, now we're safe to be able to have a conversation, to steward the question and to always steward it towards the cornerstone, even though there's room for us to discover together. And so I'm excited because I feel like what we're experiencing right now is a whether I look left or I look right, I'm finding folks who are convinced that God looks like Jesus, which to me is pretty important, even if you're discovering what that means, and that there's safe places, more and more safe places, for there to be authentic questions, for there to be the discovery, and this is the part that I get to participate in, that I feel like Derek and I get to do, and you as well, and what you're writing about right now. I'm convinced that a flaw in my lens regarding who he is will cut me off from who I am and how I can connect with you, and so these false narratives that there's suddenly, there's been a pioneering work for those that have gone first, the McLarens and the Rohrs, who have been willing to take the hits to discover a better God than the last time we checked, if that's the way I would phrase it. And men like you who are going after false narratives, which then brings to light the liberty to be able to actually, because there's a good way to deconstruct and a poor way to deconstruct.
Absolutely.
Right. Yep.
And I want to be a part of people's lives where when they're tearing some things down, they're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
I'm with you.
That we're growing in a mature faith, that deconstruction is actually the process of maturing in love. Mm-hmm. And so I'd love for you to speak. I know you're writing right now a book. You've got a couple working titles. I know what that's like. You shared one with me, Exposing False Narratives. You shared a couple just before we got on. Share a little bit about that, unless you want to respond to something I'm saying here first.
Well, I would say something came to me as you guys were volleying back and forth there a bit. I think sometimes that when people hear this kind of conversation, the assumption is that, all right, we're saying that the conventional church is irrelevant, unimportant.
Yeah,
they're not addressing the questions that people have, which in many cases we are answering questions that nobody's asking.
Right.
It's very, very generic.
Yet.
Yeah.
So it prompted me to think about, and it's this Sunday, it is a part of the readings for the lectionary. And this is something that I don't do every week, but quite often I will check the lectionary to see what the passages, what the texts are for this coming Sunday. And that can be off-putting to some people because they don't like liturgy or what they assume to be liturgy, which, even the charismatics in their freewheeling style, that's a liturgy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Right. Yes, it is.
So they don't need to take a condescending attitude toward the more liturgical or a high church that focuses, on the Eucharist and whatever the lectionary is for that weekend. But at any rate, one of the readings is in Matthew chapter 13, and Jesus, if you remember, he shares 7 parables as to what the kingdom of God is like, and then he closes by saying, "Have you understood all these things?" And they said unto him, "Yes." And he said unto them, "Therefore every scribe," this is the part that I was thinking about, "every scribe who has been trained for the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who brings out of his treasure what is new and what is old."
That's good. Yeah.
And I've used this example, I'm not going to wheel the camera around here, but we have things in our home that are very nostalgic. They connect my wife's memory with her great grandmother.
Yeah.
And they don't get the use that this laptop does, of course, that I'm sitting in front of.
Right.
But these are old and new things.
Important.
And I think the wisdom of a true master that Jesus was referring to here, one translation would say a scribe who is instructed under the kingdom, is he understands the connection between the two, the old and the new.
That's good.
Does that make sense?
Good. Yeah, that's
great.
Really
that's really good.
Yeah.
So, in fact, you probably had this experience. There are a lot of this emerging generation that are drifting away from some of the churches that have this high energy, charismatic personality that is, speaking inspirationally, and drifting back toward
the liturgy
and the traditional church. I think because they realize that
the depth
ads pass so quickly.
Yeah.
I want to find something that has history.
Yeah.
That has sustainability. So anyway, that's again.
I love that. Go ahead, Derek.
I just first of all, Jason, good job on naming at least 2 of Randall's books out there. You questioning my answers is one of Randall's books.
Yes.
Jason mentioned it in the thing, and we recommend all of Randall's books, Brushstrokes of Grace, Wandering and Wondering. You can go on his site at randallworley.com and access those resources. We want to talk about your new book, Randall. But I also want to say that what I'm hearing is that a lot of these voices that were shunned and marked as heretics, and I'll name names: Rob Bell, Brian McLaren. I mean, John Piper tweets out "Farewell, Rob Bell" when he rewrote "Love Wins." I'm rereading Love Wins right now, and I'm like, this book is a gem. It was way ahead of its time, which gets me to thinking about maybe some of the early church fathers that were labeled as heretics, maybe not amongst their peers. I mean, there's a lot of people returning to Origen now and like, whoa, wait a second, he was onto something. Why did he get labeled a heretic? And I feel like that that pursuit of truth that we have inside of us, that we have the rabbi, Jesus, the spirit of truth, guiding us in that. And we need to be able to trust our hearts that there is a goodness of God that gets better and better and better and better over time. And some of the things we're going to have to rethink. And that's why this podcast has been such a lifeline for a lot of people. But they've missed out on the fellowship part, on the getting together face to face part,
Yeah.
and I'm all over the place. But I want to talk about the new things that you're diving into and bringing out of your treasure in your home through your writing.
Well, one more thing.
Yeah, do it.
I know.
And Derek, you and I had this conversation when you and Sarah.
Oh, by the way, I'll be tweeting out "Welcome back, Rob Bell" later on this afternoon.
Yeah, Derek, when you and Sarah came to spend a couple of days with us, we were having this conversation about something that I am by no means versed in, but it has had a huge impact on me in understanding the concept of spiral dynamics. And of course, spiral dynamics has to do with, in a very simplistic way, understanding how that the human consciousness has evolved over time. And of course, we know that historically speaking, but I think it's also true with all of us in our evolution, our personal evolution, our growth. And so the spiral has been written on by Ken Wilber and other great thought leaders. It's not actually his brainchild. But anyway, it has to do with how we evolve through different, or we transcend through different levels of consciousness. It's called first tier thinking. Now, they wouldn't refer to it in this way, but to the pure, all things are pure. And when I look at that concept, first tier thinking, and how we evolve from these very primitive ways of thinking, hopefully into higher levels of consciousness where it's more unitive in nature. It is not something that is polarizing. It is not dualistic thinking. It is not condescending to others that have not, come to the place in enlightenment that you have. And I hope none of those words are off-putting to the people that are listening. A lot of it has to do with language and semantics. But at any rate, one of the biggest things that I took away from spiral dynamics, or evolving into higher levels of consciousness, which we would, Paul would refer to this as the mind of Christ.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Or he would refer to this as the renewing of the mind, being renewed in the spirit of our mind. So this is not incongruent with the teachings of Scripture at all. It's just it's just using different language. So, but my biggest takeaway was in understanding that if I am evolving into higher levels of consciousness, and I'm talking about Christ consciousness,
yes,
then that means that I am transcending and including simultaneously.
Love it.
I love that.
Transcending and including. This is the language of those who teach on spiral dynamics. And so that has been something that has had a huge balancing effect on me. That if I am gaining higher levels of consciousness or understanding of the true nature of God, okay, then that should be reflected not only in my understanding of him, but how I perceive other people.
Yes.
And and so, I mean, listen, I started out, I grew up in a classic Pentecostal upbringing, which
Right.
is very suffocating, very cloistered world. It was a very us versus them, insiders, outsiders
Yeah.
culture. And so I still have friends that are still very much a part of that part of the evolution. And sometimes I know that many of them think that I have totally left the reservation.
Right. Right.
Because they read what I tweet or what I post on Instagram or what I put on social, all the social media platforms, and I cannot be reactionary and think, well, okay, I've gone beyond you,
Right.
Right. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
the very moment I do that, I
You've
stagnate.
stepped away from.
Yeah, you're out of love. You're out of
You're
love.
out of love.
I'm out of love.
Yeah. Oh man, Jason and I have been on this like personally. The way it came to me was when you transcend in your consciousness as to God is love
Mm-hmm.
and perfectly revealed in Jesus, there's a governor, there's a constraint, and what you are most dogmatic about is that God is love, and we're heading. If we talk about spiral dynamics and transcending, this is where we're heading. We're heading to the simplicity that it's all love. Anyway,
Yes.
that's my personal opinion.
I would say that we're not talking in the context of hierarchy. That doesn't exist.
No, not at all.
And so, it's when I was talking to my son the other day, and I was saying, when Jesus says the last are first and the first are last, it's the kind of circular thinking that is the kingdom. It's the invitation into what does love look like
Yeah.
in this moment. Well, love requires I go last. Greater love requires I go last in this moment. What does love look like in this moment? Oh, it requires I be bold and I go first and I take the shot. It's a circular way. It's not hierarchical. So you're not thinking, even when you're using these enlightened terms, it's not what we're having a conversation about. We're growing confident in love, and
Absolutely.
It's Gnostic. It can be looked at as Gnosticism if it's just about knowledge, but if it's transformative love, then it's not. It's the pathway through your clouded delusional thinking into the mind of Christ. And what the whole concept of, once you get really dogmatic about that, you can't be dogmatic with other people. You can't. Love constrains you to say, you know what, I'm going to talk to you about these things that I'm growing in, but maybe I haven't developed the language that connects with your heart yet. And that's something Jason and I are doing on this podcast, and why we're so thankful for insight from your experience and life, Randall, is because we're getting more language around this goodness and love doctrine of Jesus's perfect theology. And it's, if it doesn't transform us, we have no right to thrust it upon others.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I would ask, is this spiral? Some of what you've just shared, is that what you're writing about right now?
Not well. It's not totally unrelated to it. I started this project about 3 or 4 years ago and stalled on it, and I have had momentary lapses into feeling a bit of condemnation about it, but it doesn't last very long. uh, I just recognize that when it's time, that it will happen. But there's, as an author, you know what I'm talking about. When you have a concept, a thesis, or whatever, a general idea of what you want to convey, and I have about 12 different potential titles right now. The one that seems to be resonating the most is to title this particular book, "Is It Good to Be You?" And it deals with awakening people to subversive narratives. And so, everybody is a novelist. Everybody's a writer.
Yeah.
Even if they've never sat down with a Word document or sat down, with a journal with the intent of writing their biography, they're doing it most of the time unconsciously. Yeah. And I find this to be true of me personally as well as other people I know. They're living in false narratives. I really believe that the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves are far more damaging than anything that anyone could ever tell us.
Wow. Yeah.
And, a thought really is harmless until you believe it.
Yeah.
And it's really not our thoughts, but our attachment to our thoughts.
Yeah, that's good.
Causes difficulty and suffering. Attaching to a thought a meaning and believing that it's true without ever inquiring about it. Yeah. A belief is just that. It's a thought that we have been attaching to often for years. And so in many ways, life is just this, this journey that we're on is a constant opportunity to wake up and to realize these stories that we're telling. And I'm going to start out by talking about, in a very practical sense, how this works as it relates to, it's a field of psychology that has to do with narrative psychology. And so, maybe we've had this conversation in the past. It comes up quite often in my teaching when I stumbled onto this is way above my pay grade, but I stumbled onto the research that is done with neuroplasticity. And this is, again, way above my pay grade, but one of the things that was enlightening to me is to understand that in the course of any given day, an adult will have somewhere between 50 and 70,000 thoughts. And that seems staggering. But, you pause for a moment, you see that could be very true. Now, the thing that is telling about that is that 80% of the thoughts that you will have in the course of your waking hours will be negative in nature, and that they have a Velcro effect. 20% of your thoughts are positive. They have a Teflon effect. In other words, they just slide right off of you. And what is even more concerning is that the next day you will reprocess the 80% of negative thoughts that you've had, those Velcro type thoughts, again. And so I'm going to use as many stories as I possibly can, many of which will be taken from the scripture that illustrate what I'm talking about, that people don't realize. It's almost like they're running on autopilot, and they're this constant narrative. I mean, whose voice do you hear the most? It's your It's your voice.
Yeah.
You have created a playlist that starts over. It's in a loop every single day of your life. And so, that's what I want to try to help people with in answering this question. Is it good to be you? And you probably will be proud of me in knowing that I'm going to address, and this is probably the reason why that I've delayed finishing the book. I'm going to address the topic of original sin and original goodness.
Love it.
Oh yeah, I'd love that.
We've got to start there.
Yeah, you're right.
If there's going to be, if you want to put it this way, if there's going to be reset, we got to start there.
Wow.
Because
I'm excited about the things that you're talking about. We've discussed some of them before, but this is just on a whole deeper level that it feels like it's coalesced into this new book. And I think you're right, Randall. It's kind of that concept of when you're ready, the teacher will show up. And I feel like I think the Christian world, the following of Jesus world, the church world is ready for some of these conversations that you're talking about. I mean, years ago, I remember Kenneth Hagin said, you can't keep the birds from flying around your head, but you can keep them from making a nest in your hair.
Yeah.
And he
That's
was
Kenneth,
relaying
huh?
that to thoughts. Like, hey, it's important what you think about. So there's been this progression of teaching even in the body of Christ that gains preeminence and then kind of drifts away. But there's some nugget in that teaching that's like, whoa, that's a restoration of the original
Yeah.
intent. And I love what you're
And
saying about original, going back to not starting at original sin.
but
Jason and I were
original.
just talking about this. I've been looking for children's curriculum. It's impossible to find children's curriculum that doesn't start preschoolers off with Adam and Eve, shame, guilt, sin. Here's how you and it's like, why don't we start with Jesus in our children's curriculum? What would that look like if you started with Jesus at preschool age and then navigate that other stuff later on? Anyway, that's a whole new thought.
Yeah, well, I was introduced, and we're going to zoom out from that. Once we establish the trajectory for the book, we're going to zoom out from that and talk a little bit about something that I discovered in the work of Joseph Chilton Pierce, who describes the interrelatedness between my story, our story, and the larger story. If you can envision, three circles, the very central one is your story, and then it's influenced by the outer circle of our story. But then beyond that, there is the story.
Wow.
Because what happens is it causes us to realize that we're far more connected than we know, even
Yeah.
the people we don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
We don't realize how much they're a part of our story. So, like, for example, when we share our story or hear ourselves rehearsing or rehearing the watershed moments in our lives, these defining moments, the retelling of our story causes us to realize that even though we were there, that we might not have been really remembering it accurately as it happened.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
None of us remember what actually happened to us as much as we remember how it made us feel.
Right.
Yeah.
Which influences this internal narrative that I'm talking about. And so then when we move out to understanding how it's a part of the story, then I realize that my story is just living in my story is a very small private life and a search for significance. But our story is where we find group identities and belongings in our tribes.
Wow. Wow. You're helping. We have this phrase in my house that we've used, and I'm realizing taking some of your language to help me navigate my story with our story and the greater story. We have this phrase. We say family is the long game.
Yeah.
And what that I'm realizing it's doing is it's connecting the greater story with our and my story, because of all the moment you're in, it imparts faith to go, I'm in a bigger story than just this story. I will say this too. I think maybe that word metanoia, or rethinking, or repenting. I love that you're starting at the beginning, because it is a rethinking of who he is. But I'll say this: the maybe the second most important aspect of my relationship with God is that I would come into agreement with how he sees me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that 20%, that 80% gets shifted. He's very strongly spoken to me at moments in my life, confronted me with how I've seen myself outside of how he saw me,
Mm-hmm.
and actually called me to repent strongly at times. Hey, you don't get a say in how I think about you.
Right.
That's kind of the phrasing. And so that's led me to, well, how do you think about me? And the idea that my story or my behavior is connected to how he thinks about me, that my behavior is connected to my identity. And man, I love that you're breaking this down.
Well, if you're familiar with Oscar Wilde,
Mm-hmm.
some of what he has written has been very helpful to me. He talks about in the field of narrative psychology, a person's life story is not a biography of the actual facts and events of that person's life.
Wow.
But it's the way that we integrate data internally and we put it back together that makes meaning.
Wow. Wow.
Okay. So this narrative that can be very subversive becomes a form of our identity in which the things someone chooses to include or exclude in the story and the way that they tell it to them
Wow.
themselves shapes who they are.
Wow.
Right.
Wow. You even see this in the way that God retells a story,
Mm-hmm.
where you're reading about Abraham and all the nonsense he does, how he treats his wife, all the different, and then you go read in Hebrews that God retells the story and he's excluding certain parts and telling other parts, but suddenly Abraham's a man of faith, and you're like, well,
Beautiful. That's perfect.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna steal that one.
That's so good, Jason. That is huge, man.
So
That's
what
beautiful.
you're saying is a life story doesn't just say what really happened. It subjectively determines what is important.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
And what it means and what you will become. So when people tell others about themselves, they kind of have to do that, don't they, in a narrative
Yeah.
way?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Powerful.
Well, and isn't that the case in our news culture for the last several years, many years, where you have these competing narratives as to what's important, and it's based on these biases that are held. But you kind of go to the echo of your own narrative, and you navigate towards that one because I want to believe that.
Yeah.
When Jesus comes, he flips the script on what the Father is like.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, you've
Yeah.
heard it said, but I
Yeah.
say.
But I
And
say,
man,
yeah.
I love the concentric circles that you're talking about.
Yeah.
What a small life it is when we think only of our own
Mm-hmm.
growth and journey. But when we begin to include others in that growth and journey, we see the connections of that bigger picture. It reminds me of a scripture in the Message paraphrase in Proverbs 11. It says, and this is your classic offering scripture, but I'm going to flip the script. The world of the generous gets
Wait,
larger
we're going
and
to take an
larger.
offering.
Yeah.
Sorry.
The world of the generous gets larger and larger. The world of the stingy gets smaller and smaller. When we're stingy with our narrative that it's only this and this is the way I see it, and I'm not open to seeing it any other way, our world just gets small. When we
Yeah.
are generous with our narrative, including the fact that the narrative can get corrected. I was at a retreat in Abilene, Texas, at the Gold Monarch Center. Sarah and I went because we were broken and we needed some healing. And I was in a room, and I was asked to define a moment in my life where there was so much shame on me. And it was when I was 16, maybe 17, and my parents were out of town. They're pastors. I go to this party. I get so incredibly wasted that I don't even remember leaving the party. The next thing I know, it's 5:30 in the morning. The lights are blinking at a stoplight intersection. I'm in the middle of the intersection and had run out of gas, and I had vomit all over myself. Why I remembered that, I have no idea. But the Holy Spirit wanted to redeem and restore that memory. And so the guy
Good,
just
man.
led me in this process where he said, Derek, ask Jesus to tell you where he was in that moment. And I mean, immediately, the whole image came back to me, and I saw Jesus in the car with me, wrapping a coat of many colors around me and saying, "Oh man, you're my favorite son," and cleaning me up. And I was like, it erased the shame of that narrative. To me, it's like it's a redemption of even our memories that
Right.
can come into
Yeah.
line with forgiveness. I
Yeah.
don't know if that applies, but that
No,
was so
I think
impactful
it
for
does.
me.
That's
And I'm so thankful to know, not that I didn't already, but to be reminded that you're able to edit this as necessary. But we were my son and I were, and my wife as well, we were talking about this the other day about, there's something that is a real hot item right now in the news related to a particular song. And, and my point about it, because of where it was filmed, my point to them about it was it seems like that we live in a culture that can associate anything or anyone with that they've decided is blameworthy.
Yes.
Right. I actually highlighted that in your last post.
I mean, I'm reading this from what I put on Instagram today. It reminds me of a line in a song, "Exile troubles your mind. Does it feel like a trial? Does it trouble your mind the way you trouble mine?" And so we're all poised for pushback these days.
Mm-hmm.
All poised. So and the reason being is we actually think that we're thinking when really we're just compulsively making commentary on the motives of other people as if we know what their motives are.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So
there's no life in it.
No.
Well, but when you can attach a narrative to anything, a negative narrative to anything, and people begin to believe that, then they begin to believe a lie about another human being that might not be the case.
This is why I think it's so important to come back to that original design, that place. If you're writing, to be able to come back to that, that the story doesn't start with the fall.
Mm-hmm.
The story doesn't start with shame and condemnation. It starts with oneness and union. It starts in the garden where it is very good. It starts and before that in the Word who became flesh.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's because I actually had this highlighted as a possible question for you, because I'd read it today and thought, have you noticed, this is what you wrote, have you noticed that we live in a culture that can associate anything or anyone with what they have decided is blameworthy? And when I read it, I thought, that's the original sin right there. That's the fruit of the original sin lie that sadly I grew up with that lie being propagated in many ways.
Yeah,
and
me as well.
Yeah. Thanks for reading your Instagram post, Randall. That we just got the audiobook version of your Instagram account.
So everybody needs to know that's another place you can find Randall. What's the name? What's your Instagram account?
The Randall Worley.
The Randall. So at the Randall Worley, and that's also on Facebook. They can find you there too, because that's what I was reading off of. But oh man, this is a good conversation, and I didn't want to stop it at the hour because I thought we could go another. But we're well into the second hour. Do you want to talk tacos with us, Randall? We've done this before. We've shared tacos together. At one point, you spoke at River, and I got to sit next to you, and we all had tacos at La Unica.
La Unica. Good times, man. Randall, we had some new friends that came to the church only because Randall was coming. They didn't want anything from me. They're like, "Oh, Randall Worley's coming? Okay, I'll come."
I don't think I've ever asked you, why did you choose to call your podcast Rethinking God with Tacos?
Well, I'll answer, because that was a little before Derek, although I think he's heard it enough times. Two things. One, for all seriousness, I've said this to you. I'm not an academic. I'm thankful for Derek, and he's more studied, but I'm not wired in a way where I'd want anyone to think that, you use the phrase above my pay grade. I could use that on every conversation. And so the rethinking with tacos allowed for a lighthearted, like, hey, we're rethinking, but let's not take this too serious. Then the second thing is that I'm a relational guy, and we just had the conversation. If it's not happening around a table, there's an intentionality of the fellowship that takes place over a meal. And, if you're going to eat, dude, let's do tacos. So
Yeah.
it turns out it was a good branding decision as well.
It was an excellent branding decision. And
yes. Yeah.
although Jason did attempt to actually eat tacos with his guests when they first started,
Yeah,
and apparently the crunching was just so obnoxious. You cannot do that on a podcast. No one will listen to you.
As I said,
it's a great idea.
Yeah, I didn't want to edit out all that smacking, so we stopped all the taco eating right away.
Hey, I'm convinced in our next season, every podcast has to drop on Tuesday. Tacos podcasts drop on Tuesday.
That's awesome. A friend just sent a meme that said, "Hey, it's not fair to tell kids that they can only have tacos on Tuesday. That's just wrong."
Randall, that is a great question. I'm so glad you asked that question. That's something that I think as we've gone along in this podcast, we've realized that maybe there was a lot of breath of the Spirit on that name, because it's something that is notable and people kind of remember it. I was listening to a Baxter Kruger little clip the other day, and he was recounting something that somebody pushed back on one of his statements, and where he said, the question that was said was, well, why do you give Calvinists such a hard time? And he goes, I think it was a podcast, something about God and tacos. But his memory, he remembered God and tacos, but he didn't remember that it wasn't actually a Calvinist that was saying, hey, leave us alone. We were agreeing with you, Baxter.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Anyway. I read it and thought, he's got the context right, but he remembered the name. Or he got the context wrong, but at least he remembered the name. Well, hey, I know we've got you guys are coordinating a trip, and I was invited to come along by Derek. So if nothing else, if maybe next time we do this, we'll tell that taco story, but maybe we grab some. Once again, Randall, share where folks can find you, and maybe when you hope to have this book out, because I have a feeling folks are going to want to read it.
Yeah, for sure.
They can find us on Instagram at the Randall Worley, and pretty much the same on Facebook, just Randall Worley.
Yep.
I'm not spending much time on Twitter these days.
You can also go to randallworley.com. That's his website. From there.
And as far as the book goes, I think I'd be optimistic if I said the spring of 24, but it's doable.
Yeah. Well, however we can help, however I can help, we're honored and so thankful for you, man. Thankful that you had some time, and we're this was rich. This was so rich, this conversation.
Yeah, and I'm committed to that. The next time we gather like this, it'll be me and Jason driving down to Myrtle to hang out with you and talk about future stuff, because we love being with you.
Yeah, thankful for you.
I love being with Penny even more. My wife is a big fan of Penny Worley. And,
same with my wife. Yeah.
So thankful for her. So thankful for her. Yeah. I think I owe you another bottle of wine after the last event.
Yeah, I will say that,
we'll edit that out.
I will say that. Will we?
No, it's fine.
I will say that same. Karen just adored Penny, and so thankful for our time with you guys. So. Love you, Randall. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we love you, Randall. Thank you for taking the time today.
Thank you.
Hey guys, so glad you joined us in Rethinking God with Tacos. You can find me, Jason Clark, online at afamilystory.org, where I encourage you to sign up on our mailing list. We send out an email twice a month letting you know about new podcasts, articles, and new books or products that we have coming out. Plus, occasionally I'll keep you up on my schedule where I'm traveling. My Twitter handle is @JasonClarkIs. I'm on Instagram under the same handle, and you can find me on Facebook as well.
Yeah, and my name is Derek Turner. Jason and I love that you're listening to us. Thank you for all your feedback. Please write in, let us know what's going on in your life. But we are pursuing a mission to help people rethink God, and we thank you for being a part of it. You can find me at Pastor Derek T on all the socials. And then, of course, I pastor a church here in Charlotte, North Carolina called River Church, rivercharlotte.com. Come and join us. We'd love to have you.
Hey, all of these podcasts are available on all the platforms, iTunes, Spotify, Google.
Yeah. Hey, make sure and like, share, and throw a review out there.
Let people know.
We love good reviews on the podcast. It helps people find us.
That's right.
So if this is a podcast that you enjoy, then please promote it, share it, give it a good 5-star rating.
I like that. That's a good idea.
Hey, love doing this journey with you. Praying grace and wonder over you today.